There is a flower blooming right now in the shallow lakes and river backwaters of the American Midwest that is, by every botanical measurement, the largest wild blossom native to this continent. 10 inches across, cream-colored petals arranged around a seed head shaped like a watering can spout. Leaves so wide a child can use one as an umbrella. The plant beneath those flowers contains tubers starchier than potatoes, seeds more protein-dense than most cultivated grains, and 6 completely edible parts from a single organism that grows on water and asks nothing from the land. 1,000 years ago, this plant helped sustain the largest city in pre-Columbian North America, a metropolis bigger than London at the same time, built on the banks of the Mississippi River, now known to archaeologists as Cahokia. Indigenous nations cultivated it deliberately, moving it from river system to river system across what is now the American South and Midwest, treating it as a managed crop the way other civilizations treated wheat or rice. The colonial naturalist Benjamin Barton wrote in 1818 that there was not surely in all of North America any plant comparable to it for grandeur, simplicity, and beauty. A later botanist called it the Queen of Wildflowers and expressed the wish that every state in the Union should have a bed of it. Today, state extension offices publish herbicide tables for eliminating it from ponds. Aquatic management companies spray it with 2,4-D. Homeowners associations fund its removal from lakes where it has grown for centuries. Welcome to Verdant Wisdom. This is the story of the American lotus. The plant's scientific name is Nelumbo lutea. It is the only lotus native to the Western Hemisphere, a direct relative of the sacred lotus that has symbolized purity, enlightenment, and rebirth across ancient Egypt, India, China, and Buddhist iconography for 5,000 years. While the Asian species has been cultivated, worshipped, painted, and eaten across half the world, its American cousin has been growing quietly in the river systems of the eastern and central United States since before any of those civilizations existed, doing the same things requiring nothing from anyone. The plant is a perennial. It returns every year from underground tubers that sit in the mud through winter, spreading outward through creeping rhizomes at nearly a foot a day during peak growing season. A single rootstock, left undisturbed, can cover an entire lake cove in a few seasons. Leaves rise as high as 6 feet above the waterline, up to 2 feet across. The flowers appear in midsummer, enormous, fragrant, luminous. And when the petals drop, they leave a seed head shaped like a flat geometric cone, studded with round seeds, seated in individual pits. Every part of that structure is edible. This is not a minor footnote. This is the central fact of the American lotus's place in human history. Archaeobotanists working at sites across the Midwest and Southeast have recovered carbonized lotus seeds and tuber fragments spanning the early woodland period through the full flowering of Mississippian civilization. The plant was not just present at these sites. It was cultivated and transported. Researchers document that American lotus was deliberately moved along the Tennessee and Cumberland watersheds and carried northward and eastward by indigenous communities, establishing new stands where it did not occur naturally. This was aquatic agriculture. The Osage people of the Missouri and Arkansas region called the plant tse-wathe. Ethnographic records from the early 20th century document Osage women harvesting the tubers in fall, when the roots had reached maximum size and starch content. The tubers were sliced into rounds, strung on cord, and dried for storage through winter. A concentrated, shelf-stable starch source from a plant that required no field preparation and no seed purchase. The water grew it. The community harvested it. The Mississippian culture that produced Cahokia, the city of earthen pyramids that rose on the Mississippi River floodplain, across from present-day St. Louis around the year 1000, reached a peak population archaeologists estimate at 10,000 within the city center and perhaps 40,000 in the surrounding region. The archaeological record at Cahokia consistently returns. Lotus remains alongside corn, goosefoot, and sunflower. The lotus was part of the food system, not peripheral to it. The nutritional profile justifies that centrality. Analysis of Nelumbo species confirms a tuber composed of roughly 31% starch, significantly higher than the 15 to 20% starch of common potatoes. The tubers are a meaningful source of vitamin C, calcium, and potassium. The seeds can be eaten green and raw, roasted like nuts, or dried and ground into high-protein flour. The young leaves cook like greens. The spring shoots are edible. The flower stamens make a fragrant tea. A community with access to a lotus stand had access to a complete, multi-component food system that renewed itself annually without human assistance, on water that produced nothing else of agricultural value. When European naturalists encountered the American lotus in the 18th and early 19th centuries, their response was consistent: astonishment. Benjamin Barton wrote about it with something close to reverence. A colonial-era correspondent of Thomas Jefferson packed lotus tubers in a barrel alongside bullfrogs and shipped them to the King of England for the royal gardens, presumably hoping they would be recognized as the extraordinary food resource they were. They were grown as ornamentals. That is the pattern the American lotus followed in Euro-American consciousness from first contact onward. Admired, cultivated decoratively, never integrated into the food system of the settler culture, simultaneously displacing the indigenous cultures that had eaten it for 1,000 years. The reasons are not complicated. European agricultural tradition had no framework for aquatic crops. The food plants that crossed the Atlantic with settlers, wheat, rye, barley, turnips, cabbages, the full complement of Old World agriculture, were dryland crops planted in fields. The lotus required wading into water, feeling along muddy stems for tubers, harvesting by hand from river margins. It required knowledge of seasonal timing. That knowledge existed in indigenous communities and largely stayed there. Meanwhile, the plant kept spreading, river system by river system, lake by lake, bottomland by bottomland. The lotus does not need human participation to persist. It spreads on its own, occupies new water as flooding delivers it to new locations, and produces the same food whether anyone harvests it or not. For 2 centuries following European settlement of the Mississippi River Basin, the American lotus grew throughout the waterways of 1/3 of the continent, largely ignored by the dominant food culture, still harvested by indigenous and rural communities who had maintained the knowledge, indifferent to the agricultural revolution happening on the dry land around it. The 20th century introduced a new variable, the recreational pond. As American prosperity expanded after World War II, private pond ownership became common across the rural South, Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic. Aquatic vegetation management became a commercial industry, and the American lotus, with its extraordinary capacity to colonize shallow water and expand in dense mats that shade out competing vegetation and complicate boat movement, became a management problem. State extension services began publishing control recommendations. Aquatic herbicide companies developed products targeting emergent aquatic vegetation. The lotus's tendency to return after cutting, because herbicides that kill leaves do not reliably kill rhizomes, and the tubers sit in the mud protected from surface treatments, made it a persistent and frustrating target for pond managers. The management framing overwhelmed any remaining food framing. By the end of the 20th century, the American lotus had accumulated the status of a nuisance species across much of its native range. State after state added it to aquatic vegetation management lists. Extension bulletins recommended herbicide tables. The plant's biology, that same extraordinary resilience that had made it a food security asset for Cahokia, became, in the language of recreational pond management, a liability. Here is the precise irony of where that left things. The same plant being sprayed with 2,4-D in Kentucky farm ponds and Virginia subdivision lakes is sold at premium prices in Asian grocery stores across the United States. Lotus root, the tuber of Nelumbo nucifera, the Asian cousin of the American lotus, is a standard vegetable in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and South Asian cuisine. Its distinctive cross-section, with circular air channels visible when sliced, appears in stir-fries, soups, chips, and pickled preparations in hundreds of millions of Asian households. It is cultivated commercially across Asia and sold in American stores as an exotic import. The American species, Nelumbo lutea, produces tubers nutritionally comparable and culinarily interchangeable with Asian lotus root. Same starchy texture, same mild sweetness, same appearance when sliced, same culinary versatility, roasted, braised, stir-fried, dried, or ground into flour. One is sold, one is sprayed. The honest accounting requires acknowledging that the American lotus is genuinely difficult to manage once established where it is not wanted. Dense mats shade out other aquatic vegetation, reduce dissolved oxygen, and limit habitat diversity in small managed water bodies. A homeowner who planted a single lotus tuber in an ornamental pond and watched it cover the entire surface within 3 seasons has a legitimate grievance. The issue is not whether American lotus creates management challenges. It does. The issue is what the appropriate response looks like, and whether a food plant with 1,000 years of documented human use deserves a more nuanced approach than the herbicide bottle. Because the lotus is not going away. The tubers survive in sediment through freeze, drought, and chemical treatment. Every aquatic management professional knows this. The standard guidance in most state extension publications acknowledges it explicitly. Annual monitoring and continued treatment will be necessary because eradication of established populations is not reliably achievable. We are spending money, applying herbicide, and deploying mechanical harvesters year after year in perpetuity on a plant that cannot be eliminated, and that is simultaneously producing tubers with 31% starch content and a nutritional profile that Asian grocery stores charge premium prices to supply. No government program funds American lotus harvest. No agricultural extension office promotes it. No USDA initiative pays foragers or river communities to collect what grows for free in American waterways. The money flows entirely the other direction, toward control, toward suppression, toward eradication that does not stick. The Osage name Tsewathe is tied to concepts of provision and the relationship between a community and the water systems that sustain it. The ethnographic record shows that the lotus harvest in fall was not incidental. It was organized, anticipated, integrated into the seasonal rhythm of food production that carried communities through winter. That integration recognized something that modern pond management literature acknowledges without drawing the obvious conclusion. The American lotus is one of the most productive aquatic organisms in the temperate freshwater biome. That productivity was a resource for the people of Cahokia, for the Osage, for the nations of the Tennessee and Cumberland valleys who moved this plant deliberately from watershed to watershed. The lotus was not a problem to be managed. It was an answer. The answer is still here. It is still spreading across shallow lakes and river backwaters of the Midwest and Southeast. Still producing tubers, seeds, edible leaves, and shoots. Still one of the most productive food plants per acre in North America. If you want to find American lotus, look at the shallow edges of lakes, ponds, river backwaters, and quiet coves throughout the eastern and central United States, from the Gulf Coast north through the Great Lakes, and west through the Missouri River drainage. The leaves are unmistakable, large, round, bluish-green, sometimes 2 feet across, with the stem attached at the center, rather than the edge. The flowers appear July through September, cream to pale yellow, enormous, rising above the leaves on separate stalks. When the petals fall, the flat-topped seed pod remains. Harvest tubers in fall, when starch content is highest. Working from a flat-bottomed boat or wading, follow the rhizome through the mud until you reach the swollen tuber nodes. Sliced, they reveal circular air channels running lengthwise through the flesh. Boil them, roast them, slice thin, and fry, or braise with anything savory. The flavor is mild and slightly sweet, starchier than a potato. The young seeds, harvested green in late summer, are edible raw, nutty, and gently sweet. Harvest from clean water only. State regulations vary significantly, and the American lotus occupies a complicated legal landscape in many jurisdictions. Know your local rules before harvesting from any managed water body. 1,000 years ago, a civilization built pyramids on the Mississippi River and fed tens of thousands of people partly on the productivity of this plant. Benjamin Barton looked at it in 1818 and said there was nothing in North America comparable for grandeur. The Osage harvested it in fall, dried it for winter, and built a nutritional vocabulary around water that their descendants still carry. Today, the species grows across the warm freshwater systems of a third of the United States, producing the same tubers, the same seeds, the same edible leaves, the same 31% starch content it has produced for 1,000 years. And from shore, a homeowner calls the aquatic management company for another round of herbicide. The plant does not notice. It is already extending new rhizomes toward the center of the lake. Next spring, the flowers will come back, 10 inches across, cream-colored, the largest wild blossoms in North America, growing on water where nothing is required and nothing is wasted, and everything produced is, as it has always been, food. Subscribe to Verdant Wisdom. The next truth is growing wild.